Welcome to Titan HST's Business Continuity Today, hosted by Todd DeVoe, where planning meets reality.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're at. And I'm actually in Grand Rapids, Michigan today at the IAEM, International Association of Emergency Managers Conference 2021. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at. So it's afternoon, or it's noon for me here. So I'm looking forward to that. So, hey, everybody, we're going to be talking a little bit about, why organizations should really reward risk takers and what risk means and the idea of ownership. And well, for you, those that don't know me, I'm Todd DeVoe. I'm the Director of Emergency Services at Titan HST. And I've been involved in responding to emergencies and disasters since 1989, which makes me old, I guess. And so in addition to that, I also am an educator teaching at post-secondary level. And learning and sharing what I've learned is really a big passion for me. And this is why we're here today. So welcome to Business Continuity Today. We'll continue to learn together. So, like I said, we're talking about leading and moving forward by taking risks. And there's two things associated with that. I was having a great conversation this week with Carol Seawick, Dr. Seawick from North Dakota State University, and we're discussing the idea of resiliency and what it really means to be resilient. And part of that resiliency thing is the ability to own risk, right? And to understand the risks they're taking and what that means. And so how do we apply that to people that are risk takers, right? And when we're talking about risk taking, we're not talking about uncalculated risk. We're not talking about like, hey, swimming across a rapids or something like that without a life vest. What we're talking about is calculated risk, knowing what the chances are, knowing what the failure rate might be, those type of things. And that's the risk that we're really describing. And the problem is that people are so risk averse that they're afraid to make decisions because they're feeling that if they make a decision and there's risk associated with it, then their job is at risk of being lost. And so my point about this is when we take a look at the idea of risk takers, and we, instead of saying, okay, yeah, you made a calculated risk, there was some failure associated with that, instead of having them feel like their job is going to be lost, we should reward them in a way of saying, okay, let's support that. Let's see what we did wrong. Let's do the after action report on this and come back and see how we can make this better. And a few different ways, and some of this stuff you've heard me say before, but I think it all plays into this together, is the idea of establishing a leader's intent. And so this is where rewarding that risk taker comes into play. As a leader, right, somebody running the organization, somebody who this person works for, if you establish your intent and what they are doing is within that intent, right? So that's where that risk can be taken, and you say, okay, all right, what did we do wrong, and how can we fix this? And great job of trying to push us forward. Because without taking those risks, right, your organization is going to stagnate at best, right, or become atrophy at worst, right? And so that's one of the aspects of this. The other side of this is let's reframe this into a crisis, right? And so managing through periods of uncertainty, right, that is realistically where those risks need to be taken. So in other words, this is when right now we're in a crisis of a supply chain, right? We have ships that are on the coast now, on East Coast and West Coast, off of Savannah in Georgia, and then Long Beach in California, right? There's some really interesting things that are happening with supply chain. So what if instead of saying, hey, we're going to sit back and wait for our supplies to come in from off these ships, what if you take the risk and actually maybe invest a little bit of money, maybe it might be a lot of money, into, say, onshore production of your goods, right? And at the front end of that, you go, oh, that's a large risk, right? Because there's a serious money going into there, and we might have less property value. But at the same time, that risk might pay off, especially when it's coming into the holiday times here, where your product is able to get onto the shelves more quickly. So managing that crisis through that uncertainty, is realistically is what effective leadership is defined at, and allowing some of those risks to go through and rewarded. So the other side of it too is recognizing the role of the social responsibility in recovery. And so now we're moving a little bit away from like making the financial decision as risk taking into the idea of how do we push the concepts of recovery onto on the social side of things, right? And so there's a little bit of risk ownership that has to occur from everybody, right? And so whether it's in business wise, each division, each department owns a little bit of that risk and understanding that risk. And this kind of goes into the concept that Jocko Willett talks about with extreme ownership, right? I know producer Brian and I have like long conversations about extreme ownership, saying this is my problem. And I'm going to own this. And I'm going to work this through, and I'm not deferring that issue over to somebody else, right? So that is your role and responsibility in the recovery. And each division, each department in your organization has a role to play, whether you're in government or whether you're in business, whether you're in education. Each department does have this. Excuse me, right? And so we'll see this happening time and time again, where a business that gets stagnated, an organization that stagnates, is because they don't own their response, they don't own their risk, and then they're afraid to move forward. And this is why it's really important to reward those risk takers. And then the last part of this, really, well, not quite last part, almost last part. So we're going to also lead with facts, right, and not fear. And I think we see this a lot, and especially during these COVID times, that we tend to lead with fear. We tend to lead with the idea that out of fear, we saw people who started panic buying, if you will, of goods based out of fear. We've seen organizations that were shutting down due to fear without having the information. And I think the other side of this is I think sometimes when people lead with fear, it's because they haven't taken the time to get the facts and to learn with the facts. And so as we learn more facts and information, and we can lead with those facts instead of lead with fear, and that allows again people to do better. And then where we do this with risk, okay, when you're leading with facts, it's not that you're being a risky person, right? You're understanding the consequences of the decision that's being made, and sometimes leading forward, you have to make that risky decision, if you will, but leading with the facts, right? Never do something out of fear, because and then again, we go back to the idea of stagnating, right? Leaders can make decisions based upon what is known, right? And develop that contingency plan. And that's for addressing the unknowns, right? I think that's important to understand as well. Now, the last part of this here and is act on imperfect information. We talk about this a lot, and the idea that when you're working in an emergency, you may have 60%, and that's a great percentage number that you have of information, and you have to be able to make the decision based upon the information that you have. Now, that being said, is you can't be rigid. You have to be flexible. Using the term that we used before, sepragumbi, is to be able to steer that ship in the way with incremental decision making, but making decisions as it is. See, that's the important part there, is making the decisions on the information you have, and when more information comes in, it allows you to correct that ship, right? And so crisis also often responds with a speed over elegance. And I think that's the most important part that you can take this. You need to use speed over elegance. But again, sometimes that comes across as being risky, right? And then you see people, incident commanders, you see CEOs during crisis. Sometimes looks like they're making a rash decision, but what they're doing is they're making a decision based on the information that they have. And on the other side of that is we can't allow these risk takers, these decision makers during a crisis, as they're making decisions based on the information they have, to be to be held, to get in trouble, right? To be fired over these decisions with imperfect information. But to understand the information they have and go for that context, right? But on the other side of it, as that leader has to know that once he makes that decision, that he has to be able to, again, be semper gummy, to be able to make that incremental change in decision making. So I think these things are the most, really important. The idea here is that we need to really reward the idea of making decisions, right? And not stagnating, and doing it by looking at these 5 areas that we just discussed this morning will help you make decisions during a crisis and be not a risk taker as a crazy risks, right? But having decisions being made upon with facts, right? having decisions made upon with imperfect information, being nimble enough to be able to renegotiate and rechange that direction that you have to go as more information comes in, right? And then reframe that crisis and the idea of management through the understanding as defined as core leadership principles, right? And always continue with the commander's intent. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for spending time with me this morning. And don't forget to visit Titan HST for all your communication needs. And remember to follow us on your favorite podcast player. Hey, and hook up with us on LinkedIn as well. It's a great place to communicate. It's also a great place to learn more leadership skills. I'll see you guys next week. Until then, stay safe and stay hydrated.